Okay.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here today with Crystal Lopilato, who is a mom to an 18-month-old girl, and she's also an employment lawyer. So we're going to have a really, really amazing and interesting conversation today about how to negotiate an alternative work arrangement with your boss. And before we get started, I just want to let all of you know that this is not legal advice that we're giving you here, but more kind of like strategic advice on how you might start a conversation with your employer about how you might want to shift around your work arrangement at your job in a way that that gives you a little bit more space and breathing room to also be the mom that you want to be. So, Crystal, I'm so excited that you're here with us today.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time because you're really providing such a unique perspective on this topic that I certainly have no idea about. And I think most of the women who are listening really don't have the insight that you have, on being on both ends of the spectrum of being an employment lawyer, but also being a mom. And I know that you have really successfully negotiated a working situation for yourself that I think just sounds, dreamy for a mom. Um, so why don't you share a little bit with us about kind of just like your background and what your work arrangement looks like now and how you've gotten there?
Sure. Yeah. So, background wise, professionally, I am a lawyer. I've been practicing employment law for about 10 years now, always specialized in it, which means I help companies if they're in litigation with employees. So I like to think of that as, your worst case scenario where the just relationship is completely um, dissolved.
Mhm.
But I also counsel human resources managers on best practices and how to sort of interact with employees and manage employment relationships in a legally compliant but also human way, a
Yeah.
compassionate way. That's a big part of our practice. So I think through that work, it's really tuned me into two different types of conversations that can happen in the workplace. One where people's needs are getting met and they're connecting, everybody's walking out satisfied, and then the other where everybody's just like talking past each other,
Yeah.
nobody's finding a workable solution. So I think that gives me a little perspective on both sides of it, how it works, from the employer's end.
Yeah.
And personally, I had my little girl about 18 months ago and fell in love with being a mom, so much more so than I ever expected. And so I knew that I wanted to go back to work. It's a huge part of my identity. And but I had changed so much.
Mhm.
So I knew that my work had to change too. But I didn't want it to change too much because I did really like it. So
Yeah.
I had a lot of conversations with the partners at my firm who were thankfully very supportive. And I just did a lot of kind of soul searching and setting, what are my personal goals? What do I want to
Mm.
get out of being back at work? And also, what do I want my childcare situation to be like? So I kind of had the luxury of doing this before I returned, but I think it's very possible to do this process while you're working,
Mhm.
and thinking about what your ideal situation is if you want to make a change. So, yeah, for me, some of my big priorities were still being able to be responsive to my clients, still feeling like I was, kind of a leader on my case teams, which sort of took me away from wanting to go half time or,
Yeah.
super, super reduced schedule. But I really wanted to be very invested in my childcare situation. We do a nanny share out of my house. I wanted time to connect with the nanny on both ends of the day. Ideally build in a couple minutes for running errands because, let's be honest, the mom part is not all of what most of us are doing for
Yeah.
our households.
Mhm.
So what I ended up doing was I set up 9:45 to 4 days a week are my office hours. And
Uh-huh.
that's really more like about 60% of what my usual hours used to be before. But I agreed to do, up to 80% of my usual hours in case, if things come up that are sort of an emergency, or if there's a very busy phase, I am open to working from home. And,
Yeah.
um, if something pops up, I can get back online after I put my daughter down for bedtime. it doesn't happen that often. So it's actually a really great deal in that, I'm in the office just enough to connect with everybody. I'm able to handle client emergencies if they come up, but I still get Fridays for like special mommy daughter time.
Yeah.
So, I really thought about what my priorities were and then tried to craft the arrangement around it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that in itself, I think is just amazing that you did that, because I think so many times we kind of like stumble into motherhood and we're like, oh, like women are supposed to be supposed to be able and allowed to do it all. And we'll just add kids and motherhood on top of everything that we've been doing already. And so I think it's really admirable that you kind of took a step back so early on in the game and we're like, okay, well, what do I actually want my work to look like? What do I actually want? How much do I want to be there as a mom? And I love that you put an errand time. I mean, that's like, I think it's something that we don't think about enough because there's endless errands, and so.
You hate running back and forth feeling like, I built in a little bit of extra time on either end because, even if like I commute by public transportation, if that's running super late, but if it goes smoothly, I'm stopping at the grocery store before I go home.
Yeah.
That extra 20, 30 minutes to do that. It's been a huge sanity saver.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I think that just is almost already like the biggest, like number one advice that you can give to somebody, is like to be really clear um, on what you actually want and what still makes you feel good. So you're not completely overtaxing yourself,
Yeah.
So I love that. So what gave you the courage? How did you have the courage to even ask for an alternative work schedule? Because I think a lot of women are scared of asking and getting kind of like the mom stamp, right? Like, oh, she's a mom now, like she's not fully committed to work. Like it takes a lot of courage to ask.
Yeah, it does. And I think, one of the things that we can talk about later in tips is sort of looking for role models in your organization or in your profession. In law, it's actually called mommy tracking when potentially you go on a part-time schedule and you're no longer on partnership track.
Uh-huh.
So that's like a big stigma to avoid. But I actually have kind of in my family folklore, sort of a funny story that I didn't even realize until afterwards that this is what gave me the courage to do it. But my mom was sort of like one of the first telecommuters. She was working for a huge corporation when she had me, and she was doing computer programming. So she was like, Girls Who Code. She was like a woman in
Yeah. Wow.
early 1980s, and she total accidental trailblazer. It's not like she set out to like be some revolutionary. It's not really her personality type, but she had me, and maternity leave was super short.
Uh-huh.
She wanted to be home with me more. She wanted to breastfeed, and she got back to work and saw that, her supply was starting to dip, and that really scared her. So she just sort of had a conversation with her male boss about how she didn't think there was any reason the work she was doing needed to be done in the office. It was that simple and
Uh-huh.
very true. So what they ended up doing for her is giving her this like television size computer dial with like a real phone that you had to plug in. And she ended up working from home with, doing her like software programming code, like dialing it up, sending it back to her boss over like what was the beginning of the internet.
Uh-huh.
And it worked out great for everyone. And she actually ended up doing it kind of off and on over a full year.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And, and then she sort of went back on her terms. And this was in an all male work environment. So there was not, I guess I kind of looked at it like, geez, I work with a bunch of women and moms and we deal with employment law issues. Like I've got it easy. So I think that kind of empowered me without me really knowing that
Yeah.
it can be that simple. Just recognize how can this be done differently that's still going to serve my needs?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's so cool. I love that you have a role model like that.
Yeah.
Plus, like the fact that she was working in an all-male environment, I guess it could be harder, or maybe it could even be easier. Like I'm imagining moms who work with a lot of other moms, and if none of the other moms are taking time to themselves and trying to find this balance, but they're all, like hardcore committed to their work primarily, maybe then it would almost be harder to negotiate this piece of, well, I want to be a different kind of mom,
I think that is a more difficult scenario usually if, I think we have this sort of female competition sometimes to like, who can be stretched the most thin?
Yeah.
that were really the goal.
Mhm.
And those are probably much more difficult conversations to have than, certainly like on the spectrum, like the mom who's taking care of herself is the easiest type of manager to talk to. And then all the
Yeah.
way down to, you know, the mom who would be wildly jealous if, you had
Yeah.
more self-accommodating work schedule.
Yeah, or like who thinks that like self-sacrifice is noble or admirable somehow. Yeah. All right, so let's go through how to negotiate an alternative kind of like arrangement. You also, you were like, you talked about arrangement versus schedule. Can you actually say something about that really quick and like what the difference is between like a work arrangement versus a work schedule?
Yeah, totally. So, a lot of times when people think about going part-time, they think about just reducing their hours. And that's not always an option in every job. So I think calling it an alternative work arrangement is sort of a more inclusive term that hopefully, can help people get the brainstorming juices flowing as to what might work for them, because maybe it's as easy as working from home 1 day a week,
Mm-hmm.
or, um, you know, cutting your hours, going home earlier so you're home from 1 to 5 on one day when you know your kid's going to be home, but then logging back in and making up those hours at some other time.
Yeah.
Or or you can uh, kind of bank hours if you're working on the road a lot, so that then instead of having to be in the office on the other days, you're actually able to do that time from home. There's job sharing where people actually just split a job. I know some
Oh.
teachers who have done that. Yeah, where,
Uh-huh.
you know, Ms. So-and-so is in the classroom 3 days a week, and then Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so is in the classroom 2 days a week.
Oh, okay. I've never
That's
heard about
not as
that. Yeah.
common, but it's definitely available in some environments.
Uh-huh.
But even just being able to hop on that morning meeting by conference call as you're commuting in
Yeah.
means that you're not leaving before your kid wakes up in the morning.
Yeah.
You're able to do that from home while you're feeding breakfast or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot more than just cutting down your time that can make things work better for you.
Hmm. I love that. It like really introduces the idea of like thinking about this really creatively versus just like, well, I'm either going to go part-time or full-time. Like it's either or, and that there's so much range in that. All right, so let's jump in. What do you recommend someone do before they actually have the conversation? Like, how do you really, I guess, like prepare for having a conversation like that?
Yeah, so I think there's like the biggest phase of it really probably is your own preparation, and we talked about kind of my first tip in this regard a little bit with my personal setup of really getting in touch with what your own goals are. So I think you want to be clear on your goals so that you can frame the discussion as much as possible. So you're not just going in and saying, I want to go part time. I want,
Mm-hmm.
an easier schedule or whatever, and then letting your employer sort of shape the narrative of what that's going to look like for you.
Uh-huh.
You really do some soul searching and think, what is draining me the most about my job right now? Or if you're still on maternity leave and you're scared to go back, like what scares me the most about going
Mm-hmm.
back? Is it that I won't get alone time with my kid anymore? That was actually a big thing for me.
Yeah.
Your family can be together, but the mommy daughter time is so precious too. So I wanted to have some time that I was home that my husband wasn't. It's totally selfish, but it's worked out really well. So, I think in asking yourself those questions, you will sort of tune into what arrangement might actually solve those problems for you. And you might even find that, a part time arrangement isn't the answer. Maybe when you think about what's really hard, maybe you just need to ask your spouse for more help, or
Mm.
add a couple hours to your childcare arrangement because it's what you really need is time for those errands. um, maybe it's something kind of outside of this realm, or, some other options that come up. If it's as simple as you feel like you're not able to go to meetings at your kid's school with their teacher.
Yeah.
This is sort of the legal offshoot. And as you said earlier, just giving general legal information, not giving anyone
Mm-hmm.
legal advice. But depending on where you live, your company might actually be obligated by law to let you attend events at your child's school.
Uh-huh.
That's not going to be every basketball game, but it might be, important meetings with teachers. So California is very progressive on that front,
Uh-huh.
with what the law shows. And then on the other end of the spectrum, for folks who are really, really struggling with anxiety or depression, and it's impeding your ability to do your job, your condition might rise to the level of a disability where you want to talk to your healthcare provider about whether you should approach your employer making accommodations so that you can perform your job functions
Mm-hmm.
in a way that helps you manage your condition. That can include working from home, reduced hours, things like that. So those are sort of subsets that are, outside of what the rest of what we're going to talk about today. But I think that you don't know really what category you're in and what you need until you ask yourself what you need.
Yeah. And really quick, where would someone find, like, for example, like the California law pieces? Like, are they in like, is your company supposed to give you that? Like, should you have that somewhere? Can you request that from HR? How does someone go about finding those?
Yeah. So on just getting like a general sense of those things, I would probably recommend starting with just some basic Google research. The California, so the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, is sort of the federal group that has a lot of information on that. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing, the DFEH, that's the California, agency that deals with most employment issues. They have a lot of information about reasonable accommodations, things like that. There's other sort of California state agencies. I think if you were to look up California law school activities, pretty sure that's going to point you to like the exact law that I'm talking about.
Okay.
So there's stuff like that. But then, yes, as you get further into this process, HR should be able to give you a lot of this information, and your employer might have policies along those lines. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Thanks.
It's a good question. Yeah. Short of hiring a lawyer. Yeah. What do you do?
Because I'm like, I don't know where I would start if I, started to look at that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So,
not to like put myself out of business, but for a lot of, just when you want to start getting even a sense of like what the language is to be thinking.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I think that can be really intimidating and overwhelming too.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd kind of be remiss if I didn't mention when you're first thinking about this stuff, the importance of, talking with your partner or your family about, what your problems are and what the potential solutions are. I was really shocked by how totally supportive my husband was. I know I'm not in that situation, but once I started, I was talking about how I was scared to go back to work and how am I possibly going to do this like 24/7 job while also, being the kind of mom that I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I think kind of knowing that he had my back on what I was asking for really helped me feel empowered in asking for it. So hopefully that's the result that it comes from. But if it's going to be a tense situation within your family, then it's better to know that before you've gone through the whole process and then you come home, hey, great news, honey. How are we going to afford that, or whatever it is. I think it's good to do that part on the front end and have kind of the buy-in on your family side.
Yeah. And even like I think friends can sometimes be really supportive, and like other mom friends who have gone through something similar, who understand your situation. Like I think that there's not enough conversation around really gathering a support system, and so in motherhood in general. And so I think this is true for this particular instance too.
Yeah. Which actually I think kind of points to one of my other sort of main tips about before you ask. I think it's really good to look around your organization, look around your company, and identify anybody who can be a mentor to you in this process or who can be an ally. I think pretty much anytime you want something at work, that's a good process to go through. You might find that there is another person in a similar role to you that's actually got the schedule that you kind of think would solve your problems, or even, any kind of work arrangement modification that interests you. Take them out to coffee, ask them a lot of questions about what the pros and cons are for them. How'd they get that arrangement? What hurdles did they face in setting it up? I think that is really instructive because we can give a lot of general tips, but so much of this varies based on the culture at your
and like your particular industry and
So I think, another big question to ask people is who was supportive to them in this process and who did they get pushback from? Because maybe the person they got pushback from is the manager you were thinking of starting the conversation with, and that tip you off that maybe you take a different angle and go to HR first, or I think finding out what issues others have faced will sort of reinforce for you that you want to do it or that you don't
Mhm.
want to do it. And then those people can be supportive to you down the line if
Yeah.
you find it hard to kind of enforce your schedule. Let's say you get this reduced work hours arrangement, but you're having trouble getting out the door because a meeting keeps being set for the time that you're supposed to leave. It's a really common phenomenon. And I think having some other people who know your situation and want to help you out um, makes it easier, once you actually have the arrangement to make sure
Yeah.
you're going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I am actually going to encourage like dads to listen to this interview too, because my husband and I have this conversation, where like he can clearly tell that people are very considerate of new moms or mothers who need to leave at a certain time. But dads don't really get that. Like for dads, the expectation is like, well, you're the dad, like you can stay for however long and
Right.
stay for these meetings. And he's like, well, I want to be there when my kids eat dinner.
Really. Yeah.
Um,
My husband wrestles with a lot too. He's also a lawyer, and
yeah,
he didn't arrange a part-time schedule, but he's sort of, you know, informally just done it. He leaves way earlier than he used to
yeah,
for bedtime and sometimes even dinner time, and and then he logs back on and works afterwards. And
yeah,
I think it really helps. And he also did the same process, I think, before, when we first got pregnant, just started talking to other new dads,
yeah,
other guys in his office who had young kids, and just talked about, how did you guys pull it off? And I think that those conversations, people who have been through it, who are kind of on, the other side of being newbies,
yeah,
this, they love talking about it. They love talking about what the struggles were and how they've made it work. They can be just a wealth of information and, strategic insight. But aside from talking to people, I think, another important thing to do is to look at your company policies.
yeah,
When you kind of ask the question of, should you go to HR and just ask for this, beyond just the law, that is kind of your starting point for understanding what your company formally is okay with. If they
hmm,
have policies on this, they might not, but most organizations have an employee handbook.
yeah,
Find that. It's probably been emailed to you at some point, or
yeah.
it's sitting in a desk somewhere. But if you can track that down and see if there's any written policies on this stuff. A lot of companies, especially now that this is becoming kind of trendier.
More of a topic, yeah.
Yeah, and I like to think people have mixed feelings about millennials and the workforce, and I say thank you to the millennials.
Yeah.
A much bigger part of the discussion. I think as a generation, they're less willing to settle for jobs that are going to grind them to the bone. And
Mhm.
so you're seeing a lot more companies, they're building in perks like sabbaticals or, time off and remote work. So some of that has been formalized into actual employment policies at different
Mhm.
companies. And that's a great starting point and a good thing to have in your back pocket if your company does have a really supportive policy, because there's a good chance your manager's not really going to know about it. So
Yeah.
if you know about that and somebody says, oh, we can't do that, you don't want to do it in like a super sassy way, but you might say, well, hey, actually, the company policy says this is an option and I'd like to explore it.
Huh.
Um, I think if you do that in a diplomatic way, you can get these policies to work in your favor as you're trying to negotiate. Um,
Yeah. Especially if your boss or manager isn't a parent, they might not be aware of those laws,
yes,
especially.
exactly. And I think that goes with, getting to understand your audience as you're thinking through who you're going to have this conversation with. It's usually either going to be your manager or human resources, but that really varies based on your organization structure. And
Size of company, I'm sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, not everybody has a dedicated HR department. Sometimes
Hmm.
HR is the person who does payroll, and they're not
Yeah.
really trained on how to have these conversations, or maybe not even aware of the policies if there are any policies. So in that situation, you might want to go to your manager first. And I think thinking through, if you have like a really close relationship with your manager, or if you're one of the higher ups in your organization, like you're already a partner, you're top tier,
Yeah.
talk to the people on your team about what's going to work for your team. And then maybe you loop HR in to kind of formalize the arrangement. But if you don't have that situation, and you're not that comfortable talking to your manager about it, and you do have perhaps like a pretty organized HR department. I mean, some larger companies have entire departments based on this stuff. So, go through HR and then have HR hold your hand and help you think through how to, be a liaison, helping you talk through it with your manager. So there's a lot of variation in who you talk to, but I think you want to think through that on the front end instead of just opening the door to whoever's office is closest, because you can be strategic about it and that can really help your chances of getting what you want.
Yeah, I love that. And like so much of that is really about asking for support and not feeling like, oh my God, I'm the only one who's in this and people are going to hate me for wanting to reduce my hours, and like all of this like mental, conversation that we can have, and all this mental kind of like, mind chatter that can go into it. All right, so let me review really quick. So the first three things before you have this conversation with HR or with your manager is, number one, be really clear on your goals and what you want to get out of it. Number two is identify any mentors or allies that you can, have coffee with and like explore how they got to the situation that they're in now. And then three is know your policies and your audience. So really understand, your company as well as perhaps like state laws and stuff like that, that you can, so you go into the conversation really informed about what you can expect and what you can ask for.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So if we move into when you ask, into that section of our conversation, like what tips do you have for our listeners on that front?
Yeah. So I think first off, when you ask, we'll actually focus on the when part of that, because timing is huge. And this goes, I think probably the two main things I have for effective workplace communications are, one, knowing your goals. And I think that applies all the way around. Everybody should go into a conversation knowing what they want to get out of it. And second, empathy comes into play here. So timing is really important in terms of understanding, where your manager is coming from, how they're going to receive what you're about to say, and understanding, putting yourself in their shoes and thinking through, is this the best time for them to have this conversation? Are they scrambling to meet a deadline? Have they been super stressed for these few weeks because there's a huge pitch meeting coming up and that's all they can think about? Well, then they're not going to be able to focus on you and be receptive to thinking outside the box for how to make life better for you. They're just trying to survive. And so thinking through the timing of when you bring these topics up. I mean, obviously you don't want to let that go on forever. If you have a manager who's constantly stressed,
always stressed, your
HR department's, door seems to always be closed, which is not the way it should be, but that might be the case. Then, you don't want this to go on indefinitely, but I think you can think strategically about timing. And another part of that would be timing for yourself with respect to the way you're being perceived in your company. So let's say you just had performance reviews and you just got this stellar review and everyone's talking about what a valuable employee you are, or you just had like a great success with a client, brought in great sales numbers, whatever it is in your line of work. If you've just had a success, you can leverage that to sort of enhance your position in negotiating for what you want. There's a lot of goodwill that flows out of those phases, those sort of touch points in your job where suddenly everybody's got their eye on how great you are. Then use that to make them want to help you.
So did you negotiate your time when you were still on maternity leave?
I did. I actually, and I'm a planner, so I broached it a little bit before I went out on leave. And that's partially that I think I'm really close with the partners that I work with. So they know my personal situation. They know my husband's a law partner and, super busy job too. And so I was pretty open about the things that I was kind of afraid of how I was going to balance it all. And, one of them is a mom who actually works a part-time schedule. So it was also one of the people that I utilize to say, what's working for you? How did you do it? How did you negotiate this? And she's been a big, supporter of mine since, but I did. So I think timing was helpful in giving them a lot of advance notice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if it's possible to do that, that's definitely what I would recommend. It can be scary to do that too, because you might fear that, and this is a realistic fear, that they might not want you part-time.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things I also really tried to do was take advantage of those moments when I had just gotten a good result to sort of, say like, oh, and this was all like, all these calls were done, but like just in like one afternoon, kind of,
Yeah.
I was just like, this could easily be confined to, these hours that I want to work in the future, maybe.
Yeah.
So I gave a lot of kind of notice at different points, and I took kind of an extended maternity leave. So, I mean, my process has been very blessed in a lot of ways that I know people don't
Yeah.
have. All of this.
But you really also focused on showing how efficient you can be. I think that's like a big point. Also, when we're trying to negotiate being actually present for less hours, like you can actually do a lot of work in, like less time if you're really focused.
Yeah. And in my
So
situation, which, I know it's not ideal for everybody to sort of be signing on to work from home at night and in on the weekends. That was already a reality of my job. It is for most attorneys. So I made an effort to sort of show, especially when I first got back to work on this schedule, that, hey, an email came through at 8 o'clock, and I'm going to reply to it before I get into the office tomorrow morning. I'm just going to show that I'm tuned in. I'm still monitor things as I said I would.
yeah,
Um, it took me literally 5 minutes. It's not an issue. But it's reassuring, my managers that I'm upholding what I said I would, and nothing has changed.
yeah,
Clients are getting taken care of. Everybody's happy. Um, I probably did that more in the beginning to just sort of reinforce
yeah,
this plan works. So I do think you have to be a little bit prepared to go 110%.
yeah,
When you're first contemplating this and you're just so drained and exhausted, that's like the last thing you want. But once you kind of, get an alternative arrangement, you do really want to perform as great as you can in those early phases to make sure that everybody feels like it is an arrangement that works for
yeah,
them.
yeah.
Um,
I love that.
yeah,
Thank you.
one other like weird, doesn't apply to everybody, but it might, issue on the timing is something that can be terrible for everyone else to hear. But if there's talk of like financial cutbacks, if your organization is, maybe laying people off, or, if you're privy to some of those higher level conversations about the future state of your organization, that can actually be a good time to broach a topic like this, where let's say you're going to do reduced hours for reduced pay, and sort of
Yeah,
spin it like you're doing them a favor.
yeah.
Um, like, hey guys, I'll take one for the team here. That can be a way that turns, a very negative company reality into a positive for you.
Yeah,
That's sort of delicate territory, but I think that's a situation that can apply to people where they think, oh, I just heard the company's not doing well, I shouldn't ask for something new. But really what you're asking for is
let's pay.
it helps them. Yeah.
Yeah,
If less pay is part of the proposal that you even want to ask for. But,
yeah,
and that kind of goes into another sort of tip I have to think about of, anytime you're asking for something, spin it as a solution. You know,
hmm,
um, I think if you identify what benefits your employer is going to get out of this, they're going to be so much more receptive to it. Uh, and I know from working with, managers in sort of my job professionally, either when we're dissecting what went wrong with an
yeah,
employee or counseling on the front end to make something work out better, um, I've definitely seen a trend that, managers are so much more receptive to hearing new ideas when the employee has already solved the problem.
yeah,
So, I think there's a tendency to, in, the heat of passion, when things are just overwhelming you so much, to barge in, open up the door and say, I'm so exhausted, I can't,
I can't do this anymore. Yeah,
you know, and that's not really the impression you want to start this process
yeah,
with. If you take some deep breaths, go for a walk, sleep on it, talk to your family, do all the things we just talked about,
uh,
and then go in with a very, intentional, rooted, perspective, and say, that same conversation can be just shifted to, hey, I'm feeling kind of stretched thin lately, and I have some ideas about some changes we can make to my role here that will, really make sure that I can continue giving you 110%.
Mhm.
That's sort of like a cheesy, awkward phrasing, whatever feels natural for you, I think,
Yeah.
to make it as professional as possible, uh,
Uh-huh.
while also saying that you've thought this through, you've
Yeah.
reached some conclusions, and you're going to help them out by framing the solution already, instead of just adding to their plate of, this is another problem I have to deal with and things.
Yeah. And
um
not just coming at it from like, this is what I need, but
exactly.
this is how my needs and can actually meet giving you a better result.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
yeah.
there's some other sort of specific ways that you could, with different kind of arrangements, where you can really be helping them out. So like, if the nature of your job is the workflow totally ebbs and flows, like there's really busy periods and there's completely dead periods, and you're open to, you know a more insecure arrangement, and I say insecure in that it's a little bit riskier, but one of the things I contemplated doing was doing contract work, switching to an hourly payment structure instead of salary.
Uh-huh.
Meaning, and this only works in certain fields, but you would be agreeing to be paid by the hour and work during those very busy periods, and then you're not working during the slow periods. It's a little bit trickier to set up your childcare
I
to
know,
accommodate
I was just
that.
going to say that. Yeah.
But if the ebbs and flows aren't like months at a time, but more so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is super busy, this might just be a different way to package
Yeah.
other arrangements that we're talking about, in which your employer feels like they're getting a win because they're only paying for what they get out of you,
Yeah.
but you're not stuck, you
At
know,
a job, sitting there for times that are not actually busy. Yeah.
um, or I don't know, having some personal time, so
Yeah.
that's one, you know very alternative option. But I think the bigger theme is just to really come at this from, like, with empathy in mind.
Oh.
Put yourself in your manager's shoes and think, what is going to scare them the most about losing you as a full-time employee?
Mm-hmm.
What about this situation that you're about to propose is going to make them nervous?
Yeah.
And think about ways, or what do they need that's really going to help them in their day, and build that into what you're asking for. So, in my situation, I knew that if I was proposing that I had a hard stop at 4 o'clock, I was leaving at 4 o'clock every day, that was
Uh-huh.
more work, more urgent things were going to fall on my partner's plates. And just by proposing that, like, no, I'll keep an eye on my email loosely, I'm not going to be online or have my phone out constantly, but in those few moments that I have, like, instead of looking at Facebook, I'll check my work email really
Yeah.
fast. And if something needs to be done, I'll do it. And it comes up, I don't know, once a month, couple times a year, whatever that is.
Uh-huh.
It's very doable. It doesn't need to be the thing that makes this part-time schedule impossible. So
Yeah.
I think solving for what they might be concerned about is a big.
Yeah. How do you how do you have a hard stop
Yeah.
at
So
4?
basically, it's just sort of known that that's when everybody kind of knows that's when I need to walk out the door.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 4:10. That's all. I built in a little extra time for myself for the realistic possibility that I would have to wrap up a phone call or something, and you
Yeah.
can't, gotta go. But yeah, so it's just sort of known. And, I have to remind people sometimes, like if we're about to set a meeting, that, we need to set it at 3, not
At
3:30,
4. Yeah.
so that I have enough time to, gracefully exit.
Yeah.
I have one of the things that I was concerned about is sort of client perceptions, and
Mm-hmm.
talked about this a lot with the other attorney who's part-time. And there's some clients who know that that's my schedule, and there's some who don't. Like, they don't need to know, as long as
Yeah.
I'm responsive. And, you know, there's a lot of other things you can do, not like you're actively lying, but, if you're concerned about any stigma being attached to a part-time schedule, you can sort of say, oh, like, oh, sorry, I have a meeting on that time. So Fridays, like, if it's a Friday where I can't arrange to be in the office, or, take a quick phone call, then I actually, I don't do this, but I have a friend that says, I'm off site on Friday. Hey, can we set that up for Monday?
Yeah.
Or sort of preemptively get the scheduling ball rolling on things to things that will work within your schedule. So you just sort of shift the way you're thinking about it from I'm available whenever you want to
Yeah.
I'm going to propose a time that works for me.
Yeah.
And
which actually makes it a lot easier for a lot of people if you're just very specific with, when you are available and stuff too.
Yeah. And I think that, you can have your hard stop, but you do, as you go into these conversations, want to be somewhat flexible. Like for me, the hard stop was important in terms of setting up my childcare situation.
Yeah.
I know that's probably going to apply for most people, but when you're thinking about like where on this huge spectrum of alternative work arrangements you want to fall, I think you want to be creative and things that are going to solve for what your issues are. But you also want to be kind of flexible, going into these conversations knowing you've got a plan. They might have a totally different idea about what's going on for the company. And it's important to, just as you would hope they'd be receptive to what you're saying.
It has to be a little bit give and take.
Yeah. You might need to strike some compromises. But I think it's also really important to know what your deal breakers are, because you don't want to go too far down the path and then realize, oh, your take-home pay on this reduced salary isn't actually going to cover your childcare costs, and that's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
And that may or may not be for some people, but whatever it is your sort of flexibility stopping point. It's good to know where that is, but otherwise to be open, because I think the more flexible you are, the more likely you'll find at least
a solution. Yeah. I love that. It makes me think of like a relationship too, like you really want to know all of these things about your relationship.
Your relationship is totally like relationships.
Yeah. All right. So the 3 things to keep in mind when you're actually having the conversation is, number 1, timing, really taking a look at that. When is a good time for your employer to discuss something like that? The next one is spin it as a solution or identify benefits for your employer by you going to whatever arrangement your goal arrangement is, and then be creative and flexible in the negotiation part. Okay, I love that. Oh my gosh, there's so much good information in all of this. And thank you so much for sharing all of that, because as I said, I would have no idea where to start with that kind of a topic, because I've never been in that situation myself. Although I can identify a lot of things that you said that I, like even as a self-employed person, can really make relevant for myself too, like being really clear on like what I actually want in terms of like setting up childcare for me and like all of that. So it was really helpful for someone like me as well. So what are some final words of wisdom for us?
Well, I think the main thing, the importance of this topic to begin with, is just to realize that you're not stuck.
Yeah.
That I think is what just weighs down on so many of us. And I know for me, that's sort of like a trigger for feeling like things are out of control when I feel really stuck in an arrangement that I don't like. And I think if you have mentally gone through this process, or you had the conversations and it didn't go well, or just in even analyzing what could work within your company, it just feels like you're just hitting brick walls over and over.
Yeah.
Contemplate, maybe, is that really where you want to be working? There's a lot of different, there's a lot of variation in how family friendly different organizations are, even within the same industry. I mean, with law firms, there's a huge variation. I made the jump actually before even getting pregnant, because I knew I wanted to start a family, and I could see the writing on the wall at the place I used to work, that it was not going to be as, amenable to more flexibility. So I think just realizing that you can do a job jump, you can kind of create your own reality. You're empowered to do that in our American employment system. You're not stuck anywhere. And so to really think outside the box for what's going to make work for you.
Yeah, I love that. Like really, like own your own value is what you're saying. I love that. Great. Thank you so much for the time today. Yeah, this was amazing and so helpful. And I know that everyone listening is just going to eat up this material, and is really probably going to feel inspired to even just start thinking about it. So thank you so much, Crystal.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.